Is your chair broken?
I hope not. See me double over, that would be.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully everyone had a nice lunch and are ready to plug in. We have a crew of esteemed individuals up here. I'm Israel Ostoon. I hold down partner marketing for the Western Hemisphere. It's my pleasure today to hand things over to Josh Jagfeld in the American Airlines team. Josh, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Israel. That was a nice mic flip. Thank you for joining us today. You heard a lot about the American Airlines story in the keynote today, which was amazing, obviously. We're going to dig deeper, though, during this session. We're going to ask a few pointed questions, get into some of the tactical details, talk about how everybody worked together to make this massive undertaking possible. And I'm joined by three, like Israel said, esteemed guests today. We have Chad Hamilton, Danielle Howes, and Baron Tiddington. And this group here is amazingly capable and responsible for much of this project. So I'm excited to dig in. To get started, I'm wondering if, Chad, you can kind of start out with a high-level overview of the project. Just catch everybody up. Maybe they didn't hear all the details in the keynote and kind of remind us why we're here.
Okay, so basically we came to a refresh for our flight attendants, and we were coming from a legacy Android, a Note 5. Kind of got delayed because of COVID for the refresh, so we went to iPhone 12, 45,000 devices, and rolled them out through Jamf, and it went really smooth.
Excellent. When you think about how many users you're interacting with today, some of the biggest areas of impact to the organization, what are those things?
So I think the biggest impact to organization is really the settling on a platform. We went to 80% iOS on our mobile deployments now. The only place we're really still Android is what we call below the wing on the ramp area, cargo. So going iOS really enabled us to take a lot of synergies across verticals, if you will, from flight service to flight to tech ops, above the wing, gate agents. So it really helped us out there.
Gotcha. And today during the keynote, Charles was speaking about some of the high-level objectives of the program, some of the history, how the device platforms have changed over time. Maybe you can, as a group, start to dig into what were the challenges of supporting a multifaceted platform. How has some of that started to become remedied as you've standardized on iOS?
So I think one of our challenges with... Oh, wait. I think some of the challenges we had during... So some of the challenges we had with supporting multiple platforms was, just differences between the devices, API support, remote control, what profiles were available, just kind of, different OSs, bloatware. It was all across the board. So to be able to standardize where that device is going to be set standards out of the box, and being able to deploy a singular solution, so to speak, or bare bones, same platform across to all the groups, so that way your support levels, it transfers across, was huge for us. It didn't require, this one's different than this one, so let me go troubleshoot this, and kind of eliminated some of the needles in the haystack that we were hunting when issues arose.
No, I was just going to add it. Even if there are small differences in those projects that we deploy, we still have a baseline to go off of, and that's a lot easier to maintain.
Yeah.
When you think about how that's impacted you as a technology professional, maybe versus the users, what's the biggest thing that you've now gained, or you've sort of gotten back from being able to focus on one platform, not having to have all these variables?
So I would say probably, if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, I would say we were always running to the fire. Now we're able to take that more proactive approach, and we're able to focus more time on upcoming technologies and kind of be the industry leaders and try to, implement new things rather than just constantly repeating the cycle.
And getting more sleep because there's less issues.
That's always a plus.
So when you think about all these different devices across a bunch of different types of users, what are some of the workflows that you've had to account for, or the specific types of users where you've built this deployment around?
I think the biggest challenge we've had with the user groups is some of our groups are unionized. And so just the requirements that the union sets forth that we have to kind of abide by, but still are able to pull data that we need that's valuable. So finding, where that fine line is to offer the best solution, but still appease that union, I think was a huge challenge for us. I don't know if y'all want to.
No, that's a very good point.
The unions are.
We don't really touch the union stuff. We stay away from that as much as we can. But like she said, trying to find that median that we can please both sides of everything. So.
I also think, as far as the device knowledge, it took a different approach when we moved from Samsung to an Apple device. Obviously, all of you know, with remote control, that's not an option with an Apple device. So we had to, or the groups had to work on, making sure that the documentation was up to date and that you were really enabling your user and kind of letting them make the device more personal to themselves so that way it kind of gave device ownership.
So it really came back to a lot of the flight service training, right? Mm-hmm. Getting new training materials out there, putting them through the training, certifying them on the device, and then give them that freedom, right?
When you think about the biggest challenge that you faced in kind of all these dynamics, the union workers, the multiple platforms, standardizing into one, a lot of different workflows, what is the biggest challenge overall in the project?
I think probably just the change of culture. Just getting our end users and our business units on board with this idea of how this platform works, because it's different from what they've been using for the past 10 plus years, getting them to accept the way that, as everybody knows, Apple has different security setups versus your Android. So just getting their minds wrapped around how this platform works and can work better for them versus what they were using.
Mm-hmm.
Were there specific challenges with regards to like building a cohesive team as well, or was most of it really technically oriented?
I don't think we really faced any challenges with building a cohesive team. I think we all knew where the industry was going as far as with us. Like, we were excited for it. It was a change. It was something different. So, I mean, it was fun. We were all excited. It came at a really weird time, but yeah, I mean.
What happened?
COVID.
But I think, COVID was, in this case, a blessing and a curse, because it kind of gave us time to prepare for that, right? Where a lot of times we're so busy, to have that time, have things slow down, then we could work toward the migration to iOS and migration to Jamf and have it all set up. So I think it worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, sometimes the dynamics that we've heard about in large projects like this is not so much like people aren't aligned, but you have groups that have to work together that maybe don't have a lot of cycles together, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have like an infrastructure team and an IT team or a security team, and you work together ad hoc on a couple of projects and whatnot. So I was curious if that was a dynamic or not.
I mean, there's always a dynamic when you're coming across, because any large project like this, you're engaging cybersecurity, you got the actual BU, the business unit. You have the BU IT managing the applications. You have security. I already said security. You have finance. You have our vendor management org. So you get multiple different groups all involved, and it's really getting them all on the same page.
One of the things I was so impressed by early on in this process was how integrated that team was very early on. A lot of times it is like you scope the requirements, you figure out what you need, you start to figure out who needs to be involved, and you start to pull the team together. I remember some of the first calls that we were on, it was like everybody was there, all the right components, and that's, I think, refreshing and made things move relatively quickly. So
yeah, I think we knew we were going to the iPhone, and I think the teams were excited. And they knew that success came from being engaged early on and just driving it.
So let's get a little bit tactical. As you started replacing some of the devices that now are no longer in service, help me to understand, as you were thinking about applications, connectivity, network, things like that, where were the biggest areas of focus for you during that process? I know you mentioned, apps were mentioned during the keynote.
Oh, yeah. So we're actually still making strides towards, moving towards more native iOS apps, but rewriting the apps, obviously it's not my team, but, it required a lot of collaboration, a lot of testing, and making sure that things worked when these devices hit staging so that way we had a successful deployment, because if you throw a device out there and it doesn't work or an app's not functioning, it taints the whole experience. So we had to work very closely with them. Obviously had lots of issues just changing from an Android native app to moving to an iOS app. We had quite a few hiccups and lots of delays, which thankfully we had COVID. So it gave us a little bit more time. So like he was saying, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. It slowed it down, but I think it worked to our advantage, and they were able to deliver up front rather than a slow delay of an app once the device was already in their hands. So
Sure, that makes sense. How far out, from like implementation day did you start planning this process? How long was that?
Wow. So that process, we knew it was coming. We knew it was going to come before COVID. It got delayed. So we were probably from
late
rollout.
2019, I think, is when it first kind of
Started, and then we were pretty heavy starting in 2021, beginning of 2021.
Yeah.
As you were going through that planning process, what were the individual roles that each of you played in that?
So we worked very close with Apple and looking at devices. And at that time, we were also engaging Jamf, right? Because we knew if we're going to be 80% iOS, we want the premier mobile management platform out there, because we didn't want to be we wanted to get away from UEM. We wanted to go to an enterprise level and go to Apple Enterprise Management. So, that was probably the big thing for me, is working with the Jamf team and working with Apple on products.
I think with that preparation, we didn't really fall behind on too much of anything.
Yeah.
And that was, displayed in how smooth everything. We did have hiccups, like Danielle said, but because we were prepared for just about anything to happen, everything went pretty smoothly.
So earlier you mentioned that there was a lot of teams who were aligned well along the way. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Can you take me through kind of each of those teams and the part that they played as you were working through this whole process? How did IT participate? How did the business unit participate? What were the kinds of concerns that they had? How did you work through those? Just really help us to get into the details of that matrix of the different parts of the organization you had to help make this successful.
Okay.
Oh, so I mean, it's really the BU, right, that is coming up for the refresh, the business unit for flight service. They really have the planning, the funding requests for that, and then, the business IT really working on the application transformation over to iOS. You got cybersecurity, you got to get everything signed off on, obviously, let them check not only on the platform, but on the device. Vendor management helping us with the agreements with Jamf, with Apple, and finance was there to frustrate everybody and
Right.
slow it down.
Tell you no. They were mom with the checkbook that would
Yeah.
no.
Pretty much.
I think one of the key things was the application teams.
Yes.
They knew that the iOS platform was coming, and they were able to work ahead of schedule for the applications, because had the applications been delayed, that would have caused huge problems. So I think knowing where we were headed in advance helped the application teams get what they needed done.
So it sounds to me like the business unit is kind of like they were the driver of the requirements
For
and
sure.
really they're the customer in this instance, right?
Yes.
Tell me, you've probably heard Jamf talk about this whole idea of like the end user satisfaction, meeting security requirements and IT needs and things like that. Tell me a little bit about those dynamics. If you have an internal customer like a business unit who has a requirement around a deployment, what are some of the things that you have to consider, and what did you make sure that you delivered for them?
I think the big thing right off the bat is you have a deployment schedule, and you're trying to meet that deployment schedule, right? Because there was a timeline to get off of the legacy platform, because it was no longer be supported.
Right.
So we had to actually get off that device. So it was really working with them, showing them what they could do. And I mean, that's probably the biggest thing for me was the timeline and concern on the timeline to meet that.
I think with our business units being our customer, one of the things that
I don't really consider him a customer though. So like that's the thing is I still remember sitting in my interview with Chad the first time I interviewed, and he's like, American Airlines is like a company that supports 8 other companies. Yeah, Chad Circle.
Interesting.
And so I remember that but now I think we've kind of had to transition, and instead of them being a customer, they're a partner. And so we have to work together to make sure that we deliver something that's spectacular or changes the user experience. Because I can tell you, our flight attendants, their previous experiences with devices, I mean, it wasn't great. And so we wanted to give them something that they were happy with. I think we've kind of had to change the mindset of they're not a customer and we're not just fulfilling an order, they're a partner, and we have to work together to kind of provide the best solution.
and that's where I was going with that, is the business unit at the same time being flexible with what we're actually capable of doing. We have requirements, engagement process and requirements, and the needs and wants and must-haves are all figured out, and what we can actually physically do to this device versus what they're wanting, there has to be common ground. And I think that they were pretty open with what we could supply them with.
I think they were excited to use Jamf for sure.
Yeah,
I think that was the
definitely.
biggest thing is they were like, "Oh, show me what it can do." And I was like, okay.
What can you tell me about those like delight moments? Because I think that is a huge important part of being able to deliver technology, right? Is getting friction out of the way of adoption, helping people to use technology in a purposeful way without having to constantly mess with it and have it not work. What are the kinds of things that you've seen around the validation of that delight that you were just talking about?
I think one of the big things, and please correct me, but they were so used to the way we did things in our other MDM. And then suddenly to be able to come up and use smart groups within Jamf and go, hold on, this is much easier, much nicer.
Self-management, set it and forget it.
Yeah. And they were like, whoa,
Yeah.
are you sure this is going to work? Yes. We'll demo this, we'll
Right.
do it. And they're like blown away by it.
So it sounds to me like then what that did is it just eliminated cycles down the road where you'd have to purposefully go in and change something, or you'd have to
for sure.
plan out your scheduled updates and things like that. Whereas, smart groups there.
I think it freed up a lot of people's time, just, moving things around. I mean, all of it was automated, so it was so much better. We ended up using Jamf Setup. And so you could select your role, and based off that role was the stuff that you got. And that was completely different than the experience before. That was being manually managed by a person in the background. And,
really?
Oh, yes. And so
Tell me about that. So what would happen? Before they would start their shift, somebody would have to change the device
No,
configuration?
so we did it a lot for training. When you went into training, you would have to have certain things on your device that weren't, the official version that were in the field. And so before a training class would start, there was a person who would go and gather all the devices that would be put into these users' hands, or they would go and collect what asset they already had, and they would move them so that the right content got loaded to the device before
see.
their training class. And so now it's auto-managed and it's good to go.
So a person will use, it's their device, or they're like a temporary device for training?
No, so usually it's either you're issued it in a new hire, or if you go back for another set of training, they can look up the asset or whatnot. But yeah, so they have the ability to change it now with Jamf Setup.
So the user does it instead of
Yeah.
IT. That's amazing. Cool. Tell me if you had to think about one group that you absolutely, and you can't say the business unit because I think they're kind of important in this dialogue, but if there was another group that you had to interface with a lot throughout the project, who could you really not have done it without?
BUIT, the business unit IT. He's actually here in the room. He literally, he might as well have been we worked together pretty much every day. It got to the point where when we would come into the office, because we're still kind of remote as well, we would come into the office, I think we would sit at each other's desks, on the alternating days or whatnot. I think I have a GIF chat going, and anytime something come up, he'd send me a funny GIF, and I'd be like, uh-oh, what's going on? And we had lots of working sessions. We could have been, just come over here and we'll sit here all day together and we'll figure this out. We had lots of collaboration with him, and that team.
Everybody agree?
Yeah, they definitely, that's our defense system from
Yeah.
the business unit
Yeah.
itself. So, they definitely keep our hands out of the pot. Too many cooks in the kitchen. We teach them what to do. They do it.
I guess on that theme of working with the BUIT team, I didn't ask you earlier, what are some of the infrastructure systems that you have in place that your users or your organization leverages? Are you Microsoft Shop? Are you, what can you tell us about that?
We're a huge Microsoft shop.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Teams, we use Teams all the time.
Yeah. Teams, anything Microsoft. We do have some integration with Ping.
I don't want to speak about that.
Yeah. He has nightmares. It's okay. I'm trying to think of other big integrations. We're kind of slow in that aspect, I think.
Yeah.
That's the goal for this year.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I mean, Microsoft is, they have a ton of different tools. So
Right.
it's not like there's a lack of things
We
there.
will experience them all at one point in time.
That's right. So when you think about quantifying success, if we're going to, pivot a little bit and take an inflection point here from who you worked with and some of the challenges, as you were planning for what a successful deployment would look like, I think a good plan always knows what it's trying to get, right? Mm-hmm. How would you describe that today? How do you know if this changeover has been successful? How are you measuring it?
So a couple different ways. One is just the reaction of the flight attendants when they received their device.
For sure.
When they, there was so many pictures sent of flight attendants really happy. They got this box because it came in a personalized box.
That's beautiful.
And they open it up and there are all these pictures. And I think Charles had some pictures of them standing there with a new device. And there was another one where they're throwing their other one in the trash can, So they were really excited. And then not only that, then looking at RMA rates, looking at the help desk calls and when you see that trend going down in both of those and you see happy people, you got it really good. And when we fly sometimes, we're like, hey, how do you like your device now?
Right.
And they're like, yeah.
We're not afraid to say that we're part of that team now.
Yeah,
Before you'd get on the plane and you'd be like, don't talk
her
to me,
down.
don't talk to me.
Hide your badge.
oh, you work for American? What group are you? No, but because they had a lot of complaints, right? But you take it now, and they're excited about the device.
They are.
So what are some of the specific things that have made their lives easier? Is it less failure rate or is it easier to use? What are you noticing?
I think it has a lot to do with, that it's what they're used to on their personal devices. So taking that and kind of bringing the personal device to work as far as, familiarity has made a huge change in that. Not only that, but, I hate to say it, but I mean, Apple's like the golden child. Like everybody wants an Apple device. And, so I think a lot of it is around that. I mean,
Yeah, I think they had, they
had envy of the pilots.
They had envy of the pilots, yeah. You stated it much more eloquently than I was going to. But yeah, they had wanted to go iOS for a long time.
Yeah.
And they were really excited to get to go there.
It almost became sort of, instead of just being a work device, almost a sense of ownership, personal sense of this device. Similar to what Danielle said, they're using it in their personal lives, and we're exploring more ways to make them feel like they own that device for themselves.
Make it more personal.
I've heard a number of organizations over the years talk about that affinity for the device that you use for work, and that sometimes I think if it feels like a tool, you're less likely to take care of it, keep track of it,
100%.
care how it works, right? But if you feel,
I've got numbers to support it.
what kinds of things have you noticed?
So Chad kind of hit on that the RMA rate has decreased significantly with the devices. It's actually kind of incredible how much more people have kept up with their devices. It's probably the little handy bag we gave with them as well. But I mean, I don't know if there's one thing.
The one thing I'll point out is I didn't have the BU calling me up, going, hey, what's going on?
Right.
It's like, it's kind of that no news is good news kind of thing. It's kind of quiet, right? And
The
you're
help
like,
desk is super quiet compared to what it was.
and so when you look at that, you're going, hey, this is working, right? And it's really good.
So if the help desk is quiet, was the primary event in the past broken devices, or was it users who couldn't figure out how to get something to work?
I
or?
think it was a combination.
Yeah.
We couldn't say one specific thing was the highest tallied offense, if you will. But broken devices, lost devices, software not working properly, we ran into a lot of that on our old platform.
I think a lot of us, we all adopted Apple as personal users because it just worked. And I think the enterprise is moving that direction as well. And we've seen that with those deployments. We saw it with Flight when they originally went to the iPads. It just works. And so you want that. You don't want to sit and have to fumble with your device. I mean, we all sit and look at our Windows machine and we're like, "Argh." But you get your Mac and you're like, oh, it's so pretty and it just works. So, I mean, it's similar. It just works. So.
So there was that idea that you had just a minute ago of like creating an affinity for the device, and you had talked about how users feel a little bit more connected to it. Maybe just take 2 seconds to talk about how you rolled this out, because the pictures that I saw of like the boxes and the people opening them, there was a lot to that. Can you just walk through everything that was included there and kind of how you planned that out?
So that really went back to the business unit. They did a really good job of creating this package, right? And it was the whole experience, yeah. And it was from the lanyard they chose to the bag you can put it in to the box that has all this writing on it and tells a story of it, right? So when a flight attendant got the device, it was meaningful. It wasn't just this brown box from UPS or FedEx and you open it up and then there's your device. It was this, hey, they value me. And so I think it was all about increasing that sense of value for them, that, hey, you're getting something really cool here and we want you to know it. And we value what you do every day. And I think it made a huge impression.
Oh, I think so.
I mean, I remember looking at the pictures and feeling like it looked like a gift almost.
Yeah, like a present. It was like
Which
Christmas
is,
morning.
Maybe it's a little weird to think about like your work computer as a gift, but I think there is a notion there of like connecting a little bit of the human side to like, hey, we spent some time thinking about this. We know that there's room for improvement. Here's a thing that we have carefully crafted for you. There's a lot of intentionality here, and go enjoy it. So that's pretty cool.
For sure.
So you mentioned success for you is in getting good feedback from flight attendants and users of these devices. You've mentioned that success can look like reduced help desk tickets, reduced broken devices. How do your success metrics differ or align with other groups that you worked with? Like when you think about the BU, what are they thinking about? When you think about the overall organization, what are they thinking about? How does that all align?
I would definitely think for them, maybe a value for the business unit would probably be app utilization, because there would be times that a flight attendant would put her device down as soon as she got on a flight, and if she didn't have to use it, he or she didn't have to use it, they didn't use it. And now, they're looking at app utilization rates and food for sale and all of those things that tie into the device. And I think those metrics, they're key to them, but they're important, and it shows that they made the right choice.
I think how we measure success on our immediate team is the amount of sleep we get every night.
For sure. Yeah.
Without having to run to the fire.
No SEV tickets. Birds in the air.
When you think about, go ahead. Okay. So then I guess just pulling that thread one more time, when you think about app utilization, is that then sort of ensuring that they're trying to do a little bit more complete job or something like that, or they're able to lean a little bit more into providing a better customer experience? Is that kind of the idea of increasing app utilization?
I think so. I think, help me out on this one. I mean, the more that they utilize this, like I said, they feel connected to it. They're going to use the apps that they need to do their job, but there may be a little bit of extra that they're doing because they feel connected to the device.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
So now that you've sort of taken this bite out of the project, I know there's a lot more you've talked about and a lot more you're thinking about other platforms and services and things like that. What are you sort of looking forward to now? If this is an inflection point for something else, what has changed? I mean, the Mac story is a little part of that. Maybe you can kind of like help the room catch up on that as well.
So I think the next big thing for us is our pilot's going to refresh. So that's coming up here very shortly. So we'll be kicking that off here very shortly. So super excited about that. We're looking at, additional iPads for mechanics So our tech ops group is really looking from going from more of a shared model to a one-to-one and opening those up as well to allow more personalization. And then, as Charles mentioned, we have what we call above the wing, the gate agents, and really going to that mobile agent and just mobilizing. So what we're really looking for is mobilizing the airport, right?
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. And then the Macs. We've seen, we started out very small Mac shop, mainly developers or creatives had them. And we've really seen that just explode this year. I mean, we probably almost tripled our Macs this year.
Yeah, we've pretty much changed how we deploy Macs, or we're attempting to change how we deploy them now. As Chad said, in our company, it was specifically for creative, but now we're opening up the doors to pretty much anyone, with the exception, of course. But the way that we do things with our Macs and the things that we're allowing the end users to do with their Macs, we're trying to change the culture on that as well. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
It's exciting.
So you mentioned that there's going to be an iPad refresh for pilots, right? Or is it iPhone? iPad. iPad refresh for pilots. What are some of the things that you learned through this project that are going to change maybe how you'll approach that refresh? Because obviously that's platform for platform, right? Same platform.
Right. I think the main thing, make sure we use Jamf distribution point from the start. Yeah.
I think for us, Flight for us, they're our veterans with iOS devices. So I'm really excited to do the deployment go around with Jamf, just because of the fact that we have so much to offer, and they're really the spearhead of our industry. They are willing to, look at new technologies and do things differently if it makes more sense for them. And so I have lots of ideas. And so we'll have some brainstorming sessions, go through a couple scenarios that, of ideas, gather, all the requirements of what we're allowed to do and what we're not. And I think we'll be able to deliver something super exciting for them. And that's huge.
So when there's a refresh like that, does it always mean that is it just hardware, or are they always reconsidering workflows along the same time? Like, how much of that will you have to loop together?
I think they think of a refresh with hardware, the opportunity to change processes.
Gotcha.
It's
So
easier.
it's like
It's a cut, knife edge, rather than changing it throughout the program. It's a little bit harder to change those. So I think this is the time, and we'll have the opportunity to just totally rethink the way that we deliver.
Yeah, and I think like Stage Manager now coming up, where they can have just, you got Jefferson, you got your weather app, you can just, hey, I want to look at this. It's going to change the way they do things in the cockpit. I think it's going to be really nice.
Yeah, awesome. This is a question I forgot to ask earlier when you were talking about this feedback that you've been getting from users. Are you quantifying that? Are you able to collect that and actually have data-driven actionable insights, or is this a little bit more like you kind of get ad hoc feedback? And I guess if so, how will you use that then in other projects, or what can you tell me about that?
I think it feeds us. I mean, we get ad hoc feedback. We don't really have any data collect.
There's no feedback portal or anything like that?
Yeah, well, maybe we should. But that feedback that we get, most of it being, if not all, being on a positive level, that fuels us as a team to know that we're doing things the right way, and we're constantly looking for ways to do it better and have it even greater experience for the end users.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was wondering if there was, a mechanism for users to submit feedback or things like that.
Oh, that'd be great.
Obviously, maybe to the business unit too.
So, yearly, and maybe we should kind of piggyback onto it, but yearly, American sends out a survey to all the employees, and maybe we should get with them and, add in something for the technology that they're using and kind of give them the ability to do that, because I think that feedback would be really cool.
Might be a first great year to do it too,
Right.
Some good feedback there, I'm sure. So if there's, one other thing you've mentioned that you've got an iPad refresh coming up for pilots, what are some of the other things you're thinking about? Obviously, the JNUC theme has been a lot about love and trust. There's security concepts in there. There's a whole lot. What are some of the things that you're thinking about?
So from a corporate liable, we have a pretty large corporate liable environment. And so I really want to take the time to go back and rethink how we're doing things after today's presentations. Really got things going for me. So I'm excited to go back and kind of take some of that information and kind of remap everything. I think we're going to finally rip the Band-Aid off on doing managed Apple IDs.
For me, I'm all about Jamf Connect and Jamf Protect. So that's me and the Macs, and that's what I'm thinking about.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. Well, so we definitely want to take some time to answer some questions from the audience. So get your thinking caps on. Israel, our wonderful host, is going to run the microphone around. So just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you so you can ask.
Thank you. A couple of questions. How many profiles do you have in use in general? I mean, because you've got iPads in the air, literally, but also on the ground and the ground crew and things like that. So you've got a lot of different variables, because I assume that a couple of things with regard to that. So that's one question, is just what's the scope of the number of profiles and configurations you ended up having to use? And I have lots of other questions, but I can wait.
So profiles, we've kind of taken a separate approach, and we separate we actually have 2 instances just because it was the recommendation when we went through the scope with Jamf. And we decided to segregate it by iPads and iPhones, so that way we kept a good balance. As far as profiles, there's probably, I would say, probably approaching 600 different profiles in the one for iPad, but that's multiple business units. So I would say individual. I don't know how many Flight has. We try to keep it, obviously we break it down by restrictions and kind of segregate them all out. We have quite a few profiles, but we use a lot of scoping with smart groups to manage that and keep it, manageable.
Thank you. Hi. So I just want to touch on something from the keynote this morning, because it was mentioned that some of the impetus from this for this entire project came from Boeing, because you said that dealing with Boeing as a customer and a vendor, they were very heavily iOS related. And I was wondering how much that influenced your decision to go with this project rather than continue on the direction that you were previously on.
You could probably answer why Boeing was such a huge influence.
Just because of Jefferson, and then
FD Pro,
Yeah.
Boeing Toolbox.
yeah,
There were a lot of synergies between the devices and with our tech ops and maintenance group.
Those are some of the applications that they
It
were
was only
doing
available with
strictly
iOS.
iOS are with 3 of our biggest business units, So it was a huge influence.
Yeah, heavy.
Hi. So I guess maybe taking it kind of off track, I guess. Is there any, I guess, thought maybe to utilizing like a Jamf reset workflow if you give passengers devices like for access for like in-flight entertainment and such?
That's an interesting thought process. No, we haven't looked at that, but that's a really good thought process. Especially, I think we still give devices for first class on international flights. That would be a really good use case. Thanks.
Okay, since you mentioned that you're a big Microsoft shop, can I ask the question of what drove you to Jamf and why you didn't just follow the sheep and go to Intune/MECM?
I didn't hear your question.
Choose Jamf, not Microsoft Endpoint Manager.
Oh,
Why didn't you,
why did we?
Microsoft shop way?
Oh, just because it's free doesn't mean you should use. No, just, no. No. So we did get asked a lot by finance why we didn't use the free product that we have, and we've gone through multiple exercises. Still go through multiple exercises. We take our requirements. We'll do an evaluation. We'll do a POC, and we're always looking to see. But as far as the capabilities and the requirements that our business units have, it just does not meet the need. I can't deliver a viable product with what is offered currently in Intune.
Any other questions? We have about 5 minutes left. Don't be shy. Oh, one more.
Hi, so this might be a question more for Josh, in that, an airline is a big deal. It's 24/7, it's global. Was there a lot of discussions about the infrastructure for Jamf to support, such a deadline-driven industry or business?
He needs a microphone.
Why is this guy pointing at me? Yeah, the question was, with airlines being global, 24/7, very important, mission critical. What sort of thoughts did Jamf have as far as providing that infrastructure?
Sure, that's a good question. And, I will be the first to admit that I'm probably not the best person to ask on this because I wasn't directly on the team that implemented this. But I will say maybe one of the ways that I would kind of pivot that question is to ask you, having qualifications around being able to have a 24/7 reliable service, what were the things that you looked for in Jamf and were able to validate existed that helped to make that choice possible?
We have a lot of guidelines by security. You want to take that?
That's a pretty in-depth question. Where do we go with that one?
It really started out with scoping, right?
Right.
When we went to Jamf, for our RFP, we talked to them about, hey, we're a 24/7 by 365. We follow the sun. We need the reliability. We need the SLAs. We need it. We have to have the uptime. And then just working with Jamf to say, hey, what do we need for the resources, right? For not only for our SE and other technical resources. We have a Slack channel with them all the time.
Right.
And if we have a question, we're firing off on Slack and it's right back. And so it's really just about scoping it from the beginning, right? And just making sure everyone's on the same page to understand.
I think we had a lot of the data because it's not a new thing for us. We know. And so I spent a lot of time going through disaster recovery scenarios and kind of your guys' SLAs and hosting and how that's handled, and if there's an outage, and the support, the services page that you guys offer as far as where that is and if there's issues and things of that nature. So I really kind of dug into the weeds during the POC for all of that.
I think that in our evaluations of our MDMs that we go through, we're not scared to tell these people how needy we are as a customer. That's the one thing. We're very proud of how needy and special we are, and Jamf didn't back down from what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's one of the big things, because we sit there, a lot of companies, we tell them, hey, we need this, we need that. And they're like, okay, and Jamf's like, okay. And it was like, all right, let's go.
Can you maybe just review for people in the room, like what's your infrastructure look like? How is Jamf hosting it? What services do you use? That kind of thing, so they can get an idea of how it is we support you and how you're deployed.
So we are all 100% SaaS-based. We migrated our Jamf instance back in March from on-prem because that was a disaster.
Our disaster, not yours.
Ours. Just the internal workings of trying to get enterprise, and I'm sure all of you know this, how to get enterprise, teams to allow you to communicate with Apple the way you need to in order to run a successful instance. So we are 100% SaaS-based. We do have 3 premium cloud instances, and we're very strategic about how we schedule upgrades. And I mean, other than that, as far as changes and things of that nature,
Jamf does a great job of making whatever they need to happen on the back end not affect us in our operation.
Great. Well, so hopefully that helps to answer your question. We are right at the end of our session, so I do want to take a minute to show this amazing panel our appreciation. So round of applause for our wonderful presenters. Anything else you need to do? Thanks. Thank you for joining us for this session. Enjoy the rest of the day. Obviously, if you have any other questions, come on up and feel free to ask of the team. We'll be around here for a few minutes. Thank you.